I'm Judge John D'Amato. I'm a retired Milwaukee County Circuit Court judge. And on behalf of the Milwaukee Bar Association, I want to welcome all of you to the 2020 First Circuit Court Judicial Forum. I want to start out by thanking the Milwaukee Bar Association for hosting this forum. It's a forum that they have sponsored for over a quarter of a century because they really are committed to having an informed electorate. I also want to thank the candidates who are here to participate in the forum. We have Attorney Brett Blommy, we have Judge Paul Dudinsky, and we have Attorney Zach Whitney. They are seeking election to Branch 5 in our spring election, and they are here today to address their candidacy and to answer your questions. Before I explain the format that we're going to go through, I'd like to recognize, at least for all of you, the judges, the other circuit court judges who are on the ballot this spring. Some are here, some are not, but I just want to let you know who's all on the ballot. In Branch 2, Judge Milton Childs is running for election. In Branch 7, Judge Thomas McAdams is running for re-election. In Branch 16, Judge Brittany Grayson is running for election. In Branch 24, Judge Janet Borusewicz is running for re-election. In Branch 27, Judge Kevin Martins is running for re-election. And in Branch 32, Judge Laura Granlund-Perez is running for re-election. There is also a contested election in Branch 29. The incumbent is Judge Dan Gabler, and running in that race is Attorney Rebecca Kiefer. Now, if any of the judges or candidates are here, please stand, and we welcome you. Thank you. Now, the format that we follow at this forum is as follows. Each candidate is going to be given 2 minutes for opening remarks. The order for openings and closings was based on a drawing by Lott a few minutes ago. You will all have an opportunity to submit written questions for the candidates. At the end of the tables, there's paper and pens, but I ask that if you have a question, address it to all of the candidates, not just to one of the candidates. Your questions can be hard-hitting, but they need to be respectful. I will vet all the questions for appropriateness, and the moderator will be given those questions and will determine which ones will be used. All of the answers, or all the questions will be answered by all of the candidates. At the conclusion, each of the candidates will be given 1 minute to make closing remarks. We do have a timekeeper who's here to let the candidates know when there's 30 seconds left and when there's 5 seconds left. I've oftentimes say maybe you should have a third one that says you're done. We ordinarily don't do that. And of course, our moderator will be enforcing the time limits. Our moderator is David Umhafer. He has been a news reporter for many years with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. He is currently the director of the O'Brien Fellowship in Public Service at the Marquette University College of Communication. We are honored to have Dave with us today. Please welcome Dave Umhafer.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Judge D'Amato. Thank you to the Bar Association for asking me to help out again this year. This looks a little bit like church with everybody sitting in the back, but I hope you guys are going to be lively today. Candidates, good luck to all of you. We look forward to hearing your views. To the audience, thank you for caring about this election. Your questions are welcome, as Judge D'Amato said. I'm going to jump right in here and let the candidates talk after just a very brief introduction. Brett Blommy. Mr. Blommy is a former assistant state public defender who is currently the CEO and president of the Cream City Foundation, a Milwaukee nonprofit serving the needs of LGBTQ people. In the middle seat, the current office holder in Branch 5, Judge Paul Dudinsky. He was a prosecutor in the Milwaukee County DA's office for 2 decades. Governor Walker appointed him to the bench in late 2018. Zach Whitney. Mr. Whitney is also a former prosecutor in the DA's office and now handles business and commercial litigation as a shareholder at Kohner, Mann & Kalis. So let's jump in with opening statements, 2 minutes apiece. By drawing before the forum, Judge Dudinsky will start, followed by Mr. Blommy and Mr. Whitney.
All right, thank you. My name is Paul Dudinsky. I became a judge because I think we want progress and we want leadership in Milwaukee, and we want new and fresh ideas, creative, dynamic approaches. We want to build bridges. We want to tear down barriers and live together peacefully. We want our children, I think, to have the very best in life. And I happen to be at the Milwaukee County Children's Court Center. We want our kids to learn our values of integrity, hard work, and to have a sustained moral purpose. And I think we want our judges to be leaders, to take a stand against those people who might steal this vision for Milwaukee's future, who might wreak havoc and trauma upon others, or who might create division and disharmony in our community. It's been said that if you want peace, work for justice, and where better than the justice system. I believe in standing up for justice as well as the law. I believe in people as well, and in the power of all of us to transform our communities here in Milwaukee. For over 20 years, I did prosecute crime and worked in the Milwaukee District Attorney's Office. There, I advocated for domestic violence victims when crimes were committed. I served victims of sexual abuse as well as child abuse. I also worked with Milwaukee Public Schools. I worked with educators and students and trained them in restorative justice for about 5.5 years. I think our systems are created by people, and I am very, very fortunate to work with a terrific group of people, colleagues at the Children's Court Center, colleagues downtown, members of the state bar, social workers, probation agents, law enforcement. We need more faith, we need more community, but I do believe in Milwaukee, and I do believe we can make a difference, and so that's why I became a judge.
Thank you. Mr. Blummy?
All right. Well, thank you all very, very much. My name is Brett Blummy, and I am, as indicated, the president and CEO of the Cream City Foundation here in Milwaukee. I just want to start by saying, first of all, thank you to the Bar Association, and thank you to all of you for being here. Anytime we have an opportunity to have more than 2 people that are engaged and going to vote in this race, so it's very exciting for me to be here with all of you. I also want to take an opportunity to just tell you, how humbled I am. I am a first-generation college student. My parents are cattle people. I grew up in a very rural part farming community in Missouri. So to have the opportunity to be sitting here with all of you, to even be a candidate for this position, is a very humbling experience for me, and I always take the opportunity to acknowledge that and thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to do this. My professional background has been dedicated to working for justice and equity across the spectrum, working for people who are often marginalized and overlooked. After law school, I served as a state public defender, where I saw the horrifying intersection between mental health, substance abuse, and our criminal justice system. I saw how easy it is for judges to be scared of our clients. And now I have a tremendous opportunity to serve as President and CEO of Cream City Foundation, where we get to work again with some of the most marginalized in our community, the LGBTQ+ community here in Milwaukee. And I'm running to be your next Branch 5 Circuit Court judge because, quite frankly, nothing in our broken criminal justice system will change if we continue to elect the same type of people as judges. And that's why I'm running.
Mr. Whitney?
Thank you. My name is Zach Whitney. I'd like to thank the Bar Association as well for having us here, and I'd like to thank all of you folks for showing up. I am Zach Whitney. Who is that? Well, I've actually practiced either before, with, or against many of the people that are presently in this room. For those that I have not practiced before, with, or against, a brief background here. Presently, I'm a shareholder at Konerman and Kalis. That's a civil litigation commercial law firm on the north side. I'm a trial attorney. When I say I'm a trial attorney, I appear in court all the time. Courts all over the state of Wisconsin, federal courts, both eastern and western districts, District as well as the Northern District of Illinois, and I try cases. My last case wasn't tried 6 months ago or 6 weeks ago. It was tried on Friday. It was up in Monroe County. It was a $100,000 dispute governing or concerning a franchise agreement, waiting to have a ruling on that in mid-March. Been doing that for 8 years. I'm thoroughly versed in civil procedure, civil practice, civil law. Prior to doing the current job that I'm in right now as a civil litigator, I was an assistant district attorney with Milwaukee County. I was there for 8 years, from 2004 to 2012, practicing primarily in the areas of domestic violence and gun violence, almost always violent crimes. It was a big passion of mine. It was wonderful, and I loved being a voice for the people in our community that don't oftentimes have individuals speaking for them. Can you hear me? Excellent. So that was 2004 to 2012. Prior to that, I was a clerk for the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. I'm running for judge. Strike that. I'm living in Milwaukee County not because I want to run for judge. I'm living in Milwaukee County because I love the city of Milwaukee and I love Milwaukee County. My children and my wife live here with me. We are raising a family. My children attend MPS. I'm running for judge because I'm the best candidate for the job. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll jump right in with some questions here. We're going to go down the row alphabetically, starting with Mr. Blumey. What special or unique quality would you bring to the circuit court that sets you apart from the other candidates?
Yeah, so that's an easy one. I'm the only person in the race that served as a public defender who knows what it feels like to stand next to somebody who's getting sentenced to prison and then walk out of that courtroom and talk to grandma and mom who just lost their 17-year-old son to the system, quite frankly. By the time I got to that case, the many systems had failed that person. And then for the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to work in the trenches for justice and equity outside of the judicial system. And I think that's an important perspective. You know, our community isn't just judges. It's not just happening at the courthouses in our community. And so I bring a unique perspective, having both litigated, being in the trenches in the courtrooms across Wisconsin, jury trials, motion hearings, everything. But also having the experience of outside the courtroom, using my legal training to advocate on behalf of those who don't have a voice outside of the courtroom, which I think is a unique perspective and one that I'm the only candidate that has that perspective.
Thank you. Judge?
Actually, in the beginning of my career, I graduated from UW-Madison in 1993, and from 93, 4, 5, 6, I actually represented people in our courts, both civil courts and criminal courts. What's great for me is to be able to look across the courtroom out at the Children's Court Center and see that on a delinquency case, I've represented kids. I've met with them in secure detention. I've been with them. I've been in probably half of the prisons in the state of Wisconsin representing people. As I look at the prosecution role, obviously I served in the Milwaukee DA's office over 20 years. I know that role well. I know the role of a guardian ad litem. So I'm probably the only candidate that's done criminal defense, criminal prosecution, civil work, and then I worked for the State Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection. I was the chief legal counsel at DATCAP. So I have that state government experience as well. I also have been a public servant for the past 23 years. I was hired by E. Michael McCann in late 1996 and began the day after Martin Luther King Day in 1997. So it's been 23 years straight of my nearly 27 years of service as an attorney. I take education seriously. I have a doctoral degree in addition to my law degree. I also, as I mentioned, have been very committed to restorative justice. That was actually my dissertation topic. And it was my study to study students in two MPS schools, Vincent High School as well as Madison High School. So I bring that to the bench, and it was probably in many ways a great preparation for me doing that work, hearing those youth speak. I'm also very committed to our community. I am the only candidate who was born and raised right here in Milwaukee. So that
you.
as well as my current judicial service as well. I think those are all qualities that I bring to the bench.
Thank you.
I'm the only candidate with a substantial amount of both civil and criminal litigation experience, having done both 8 years in the criminal courts here exclusively in the city of Milwaukee County, as well as in the civil courts. And again, that's been all over the state, though primarily in Milwaukee County. And what those two experiences have done is they've given me the opportunity to litigate the hard cases. When I'm saying litigating the hard cases, I was one of the prosecutors, in fact, the chief prosecutor that was working on the state versus Scotty Baldwin, one of the renowned domestic violence offenders that we had in the Milwaukee County Circuit Court back around 2007. This is a case wherein Scotty had multiple domestic violence victims that he was committing crimes against, and he was very successful at doing that because he would intimidate his victims and keep his victims from coming to court in order to testify against him. He was using the confrontation clause as a sword rather than a shield, which is what it's designed for. And we, in prosecuting him, ended up expanding, developing the doctrine of forfeiture by wrongdoing in the state of Wisconsin in State v. Baldwin. It is a published Court of Appeals case, and it is the current law in the state of Wisconsin when it comes to the doctrine of forfeiture by wrongdoing. And the doctrine basically just stands for this. It stands for if you're the reason why your victims are not showing up to court, in other words, if your intimidation and your actions are keeping them from showing up to court, then their statements to whomever outside of court can be used against the offender, which is a massive asset for prosecutors to have when they're going after individuals that are perpetrating domestic violence and other crimes of violence. That was a very difficult case to work on, and not only did we prevail, but we created what is the current law in the state of Wisconsin. That's the type of lawyer I am and the type of diligent judge I will be. Thank you.
Thank you. We have at least 5 questions from the audience on mass incarceration. Obviously, this continues to be a big focus around the country on reducing incarceration in light of historic racial disparities. I want to ask all 3 of you, what steps, if any, could you or would you take in your courtroom to address that issue? We're going to start with Mr. Whitney.
Thank you. Mass incarceration is a massive problem. Right now, we have nearly 25,000 inmates in the Wisconsin state prison system. That's over double what they have in Minnesota, despite the fact that the population of Minnesota is 5.6 million. Our population is 5.8 million. It doesn't make any sense why we have over double the number of inmates here. Our state is no safer. This is an issue that needs to be addressed both by the executive, the legislature, but there are things that the judges can do in order to reduce incarceration. One of the big problems is reincarceration, and that is roughly 400 inmates a month are being returned to prison after having been released on supervision. And what's amazing about that statistic is that over half of them, over 200 of them, are being sentenced or returned to prison not based upon a new criminal offense. They're being returned to prison based upon some sort of violation of their probation or parole. It's remarkable. So they're going to prison for reasons that judges could never send them to prison for, such as dropping dirty urine, frankly, not maintaining appointments with their probation or parole agent, not maintaining adequate housing. I had one individual who a couple of weeks ago told me he was returned because he was hanging out with felons. What can a judge do? The judge can limit supervision, and where appropriate, they can also withhold the sentences. And by withholding a sentence, if somebody gets revoked, then they're brought back before the judge, and the judge can decide whether or not that individual needs to be returning to prison or going to prison at all, or what form of punishment or what form of redress is necessary. That way we don't have a situation where the decision to send individuals to prison is being delegated to a non-elected official, which is what's happening oftentimes right now within our Department of Corrections, Probation and Parole Department. Thank you.
Mr. Blumey.
All right. Well, thank you for bringing this up. This is a key issue of my campaign and one of the biggest reasons that I'm running for judge. I am committed to adopting and being part of the conversation around the ACLU's Smart Justice initiatives. As many of you know, these are a set of reforms and initiatives that are aiming at reducing our prison population by 50% over the next several years. And those are, as Mr. Whitney indicated, there's a variety of reforms that need to happen, including legislative reforms. I know Representative Evan Goyke has been a leader on this. He's a Milwaukee representative. Prosecutorial reforms. The prosecutor's office has to make reforms. The probation department needs to make reforms. But what can judges do? And I think there's a couple things that I want to mention that I will do as judge. And first and foremost, and this is very important, I will hold every person in my courtroom accountable, including law enforcement. I am, as a public defender, I have seen time and time again judges across this state who bend over backwards to accommodate law enforcement because they're scared of what might happen if they don't rule the correct way on a Fourth Amendment issue, for example. And so we have to hold everybody accountable, and that includes prosecutors, and that includes law enforcement. Prosecutors and law enforcement, by the way, have almost all the power in the criminal justice system. And so to give them additional power is just quite frankly wrong. Judges should not be bending over backwards to accommodate them. And then there's another issue, concurrent prison sentences. So often what will happen, and I've seen this happen all the time, you have 3 felonies, you get sentenced 2 years of in custody, 3 years of extended supervision. The judge will run those concurrently, which means at the same time, obviously. But what will happen is the probation department will only revoke 1, send the person back to prison, and then all of a sudden they're still on extended supervision for another 6 years after. And what happens is it's unintended consequence. It keeps people on probation for a lot longer than was intended by the judge.
Judge?
So I was in law school in 1991, and there was an article in the paper saying Wisconsin had doubled its prison population in 10 years. And I remember reading the article because in 1991, our prison population was 7,500. And by the year 2000, we reached 20,000. During the 1990s, the war on drugs was going on, and you'll recall the drug czar was appointed by the first President Bush, and then secondly, when President Clinton came on board, he indicated that there were going to be 100,000 more law enforcement officers on the streets, and you may recall that. And the Milwaukee DA's office at one time, almost one out of every 6 inmates in the entire Wisconsin prison system was prosecuted by the drug unit in the Milwaukee District Attorney's Office. That's how seriously people took that issue. And with that, our prison rates skyrocketed. Now, in the last 20 years, since 2000 up to the present, now we have about 23,500 or so, last time I looked on the DOC website. But this has been an age-old problem. This is not something new. This is something that Wisconsin has grappled with for quite a great long period of time. I think there are a number of things that all of us can do, including judges. Number one is education. We've got to support our schools. We've got to accentuate the learning. Schools are very, very important. When I'm in court all the time, I've been told I probably ask more about school records than anybody else. I want to know how kids are doing and encourage and support their schooling. We've got to support impoverished families. Inmates, they're in poverty. Most folks are in poverty. Also, end domestic violence. I saw data when I was directing the domestic violence unit in Milwaukee from 2000 to 2007 that 85% of incarcerated individuals grew up in homes where there was domestic violence. I don't believe that statistic. I believe it's larger than that, actually. So we have to end domestic abuse. We've got to innovate with partners from the faith community as well as the business community. But it is an issue that's going to face this community, and we all need to be aware of it, and we need to be aware of folks who have been through oppression, and we need to all continue that educational process ourselves.
Thank you. A couple more audience questions. Basic qualifications. What kinds of law have you practiced, and how long have you practiced? And I would throw in trial experience as well on that. So how long you've practiced, what kinds of law, and trial experience. I'm going to start with Judge Dudinsky.
Sure, I've touched on it already. I graduated in '93. I think it'll be 27 years this coming May or June that I practiced. I began in private practice. I've done a smattering of cases from administrative law. Obviously, I worked as chief legal counsel, so I know Chapter 227 and the admin codes pretty well. I also did appellate work, so I did a number of cases, probably in excess of 50 different cases, folks that I represented. Those weren't civil, those were criminal nature, primarily. I mentioned to you also that I did criminal defense work as well for those 3.5 years, and then I prosecuted in the Milwaukee DA's office. When I was there, I had a variety of positions, misdemeanors, domestic violence for a year, then I went out and worked at Children's Court Center back in '98, '99, and then I returned downtown and I prosecuted sexual assaults. 1999, 2000, 2001. 2001, I took over the directorship of the domestic violence unit. I returned to the Children's Court Center in 2007, and in 2008, I began working with the Milwaukee public school system for about 5.5 years. I worked in about 80 of our 180 or so schools in MPS, and I taught educators and I taught students. It was very valuable. Probably done over 500 different mediations working with the youth who were otherwise going to be suspended, but for us stepping in and doing these restorative practices. So it was very valuable work. I returned to the Children's Court Center, worked there in the Family Drug Treatment Court. I was the team captain of that for 2.5 years, prosecuting CHIPS cases. Then I became the chief legal counsel in May of 2017 to 2018, and then I began in January of 2019. Done a lot of trials, just actually probably about 50 different juries and probably over 100 court trials. I just presided over about a week-long jury trial with 4 different, just actually terrific attorneys at the Children's Court Center. So it's been excellent work. Preside over hundreds of different contested hearings, including this morning.
Mr. Whitney?
Sure. So I believe the question was trial experience and just jury legal experience in general. Is that correct? All right. So I began after graduating in Marquette, magna cum laude, 6 in my class. I was working for the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals in 2002, 2003. After doing that for a year, I applied to become a district attorney. I sent my resume and my cover letter in to E. Michael McCann, and he decided to meet me up at Michael's on Wisconsin Avenue. And he said, Mr. Whitney, while he was eating breakfast and I was just drinking lots of coffee, why on earth do you want to become an assistant district attorney? You graduated near the top of your class at Marquette and just finished up a very prestigious law clerk position. You could go just about anywhere and actually make some money. I'm not going to be able to pay you. I'm not going to be able to pay you much at all being an assistant district attorney. Why do you want to do this? And I said, I want to do this because I want to work for the public. I want to use my smarts, my brain, helping out our community. So I worked in the district attorney's office for 8 years, again, primarily domestic violence and gun violence. I have no idea how many trials I did. I actually was keeping track during about the first 9 months I was there. I was assigned to Judge Conkle's court. I got to number 24, and then I lost track of jury trials, probably somewhere around 100 jury trials. Again, no idea how many civil or court trials. But after doing that for 8 years, I left the DA's office, went to Konerman and Kalis. That's where I've been a civil litigator ever since. I've done an awful lot of trials there as well, just within the last 6 months. Well, I did one on Friday up in Monroe County. I did one before Judge Deering out in Jefferson County, as well as one before Judge Domina in Waukesha County. I think I might have gotten Justice Dallett's last jury trial before she went to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, but you'd have to ask her that one. In any event, I have a vast amount of trial experience, both civil and criminal. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Blumey?
Thank you very much. As I indicated before, my experience is both in the courtroom and outside of the courtroom. So as a state public defender, I represented people, the majority of my caseload was representing folks that are charged with criminal misdemeanors or felonies, and that was anywhere between 150 to 200 cases per year for about 5 years. And we also represented child support folks who were in violation of paying their child support, had several trials around CHIPs and mental health commitments, which is another area of the law that public defenders are part of. And then I was a city prosecutor for the city of Madison, where we did a lot of court trials, because in municipal court we rarely did jury trials. And now I'm the Board of Zoning Appeals chairperson for the City of Milwaukee. That's a quasi-judicial branch. I was appointed by Mayor Barrett and unanimously approved by the Milwaukee Common Council. That's a part-time position in addition to my work at Cream City Foundation. We hear a variety of different types of cases, including dimensional variance requests on new buildings and additions to folks' homes and businesses. We also hear use types of cases. So, for example, if somebody wants to open an in-home daycare, that type of use, a business is not allowed in a residential neighborhood, and so therefore they have to get a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals. And that's been a great experience. So I am the head of that department. I do not report to anybody. It's, like I said, an independent agency within the city of Milwaukee. I oversee a board and the staff of the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Thank you. So there's been some remarks already up here about residency and where people live and where people have lived, and an audience question on this as well. And I was ready for this too, so I've got a little bit of background. The state constitution says that to be eligible to take office as a judge in a jurisdiction, a person must be a qualified voter elector there at the time of the election or appointment. It's been reported in the Journal Sentinel that Judge Dudinsky, in your application for a Waukesha County judgeship in 2018, that you noted that for the past 22 years your family had resided in Waukesha County. It's also been reported that Mr. Blamy's family lives in suburban Madison, and that you may split your time between there and a home in Milwaukee. Mr. Whitney, in this campaign, you've emphasized that you live in Milwaukee full-time, and that, quote, residents have the right to elect a member of our community as our judge. So let's hash this out a little bit. Can each of you give us your view of how this constitutional requirement factors into this race?
Yeah, I'll go first. Thank you for bringing this up. I live here in Milwaukee. I own a home here in Milwaukee. I pay property taxes in the city of Milwaukee. I work here in Milwaukee. I'm the president and CEO of a Milwaukee-based nonprofit that has been working for equity and justice issues for the last 36 years for members of the LGBTQ plus community. I serve as the City of Milwaukee Board of Zoning Appeals chairperson, having been appointed by Mayor Barrett, unanimously approved by the Milwaukee Common Council, every single member of the Milwaukee Common Council. My husband and children live in Dane County, and the reason they live there is because I work for a small nonprofit. I don't get health benefits through my work. I don't get any benefits through my work. I get a paycheck. So if and until my husband can find a job here in the Milwaukee area, which he's been looking, we have to have a job that has health benefits. It's just a reality. He had an offer from a university here in the Milwaukee area, but the benefit package was extremely insufficient from what he gets at the state of Wisconsin. He works at UW-Madison. Not only that, but my son, we adopted our two children from the foster care system. You know, my son has special needs. So to think that, you know, we're going to go without health benefits is just crazy. So what we did, at a time when the conversation around residency is how the firefighters and the police officers and the teachers are leaving the city, my husband and I decided we're going to take our money and we're going to invest it in the city of Milwaukee, and I'm going to live here because I'm committed to making Milwaukee a better place for everyone. So that's just the facts. I mean, Mr. Whitney likes to talk about my children a lot, and that's fine if that's what he wants to talk about. But the reality is I live here and I'm a qualified electorate, and my husband and I are doing the tough things that families do. Families make sacrifices, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you. Judge Dudinsky, and then maybe an extra 10 seconds if you need it.
Okay. So I'm the only candidate who was born in Milwaukee. I was raised here. I was born at St. Joe's Hospital in 1967. My dad worked for the city of Milwaukee for 42 years. My mom taught nursing after graduating from Marquette University. She taught at MATC for between 30 and 35 years. I and my brothers, my sister, we were raised here. So I am the only candidate here who's from Milwaukee. I went to Market High, where my son is going as well. Judge Maxine White, she administered the judicial oath of office to me on January 6, 2019, and I promised to follow the laws of the state of Wisconsin. I've done so. I've followed both the spirit as well as the letter of the law. I was very, very fortunate because I have a residence here in Milwaukee, in Whitefish Bay, and it was available to me, and that's where I live. And I have checked, and if you got a Google locator on your phone, I've checked, and I have been a presence at either my home in Whitefish Bay, or I have been at judicial conferences for 98+% of the time on days in the past. It must be about 300, close to 400 days since I took that judicial oath of office. My wife Lisa, she's here today. She doesn't live here, and I'll tell you the reason why. Her mom's 82 years of age, her dad 87, and she took care of her father. He died on January 18th, and Lisa was there, and that was the decision that we as a family made. It's been a sacrifice. It's been not easy for us, but it was a sacrifice we made, and you know what? I wouldn't change that around. If I was called upon to make that decision, I'd make the same decision again. I think it was the right thing that my wife did, and I support her in that, but I'm the one up for election, and I live here.
Mr. Whitney?
Yes, so the Journal Sentinel hasn't just been reporting on the residencies of my two opponents. It's also been doing an awful lot of reporting recently on what's happening in the city of Milwaukee since the residency requirement was lifted, and how that has affected, frankly, property values and other things here in the city of Milwaukee. And suffice to say, it's not good. Mike Goucher had an article probably about a month and a half ago. Then just on Thursday, this last Thursday, the Journal Sentinel had another really fascinating article on this with a nice little slide map where you could slide back and forth and see the percentage of renters in Milwaukee's neighborhoods between 2005 and 2019. And suffice to say that in 2019, we have far more renters than homeowners in the city of Milwaukee. 2005, I believe home ownership was over 80%. Now we're down to 69%, and it's dropping. So these are good-paying, family-supporting, middle-class jobs. That being a Milwaukee County judge is a good-paying, family-supporting, middle-class jobs. That can either be money that is spent here, invested back in our community, where your children are going to school, where your family is living, or it can be invested somewhere else, such as Cottage Grove. I disagree with what Mr. Blummy said. He bought a home in Cottage Grove in the spring of last year. That's not investing in our city. Mr. Dudinsky may have been born here, and he may have been raised here, but he chose to leave here, and he chose to leave here years ago and raise his family in Delafield. So be it. Be a Waukesha County judge then. I moved to the city of Milwaukee 20 years ago. I've lived exclusively in the city of Milwaukee for the last 20 years, River West, Bayview, and now down in Jackson Park. My kids go to MPS. I am vested in this city, and I am investing in this city. By the way, the statute, and one thing to add here, it's not just the Constitution, the statute, 6.10 sub 2, that defines residency for a married person. It says a married person resides not where they work, it's where their family lives. Neither of my opponents are following the letter or the spirit of the law.
Mr. Whitney, we've had a request for a response. Judge Dudinsky, do you want to start? 30 seconds, if you can. Maybe more.
Mr. Whitney, I have had Milwaukee as my permanent address over 30 years, plus I worked in the Milwaukee DA's office for over 20 years. I'll be honest with you, I wasn't going to bring this up, but I remember you walking around the courthouse with a Cleveland Cavaliers jersey on over your tie and your shirt and underneath your suit coat. I'm from Milwaukee, and I wear around the bucks. I'm sure we know where you're rooted and where you came from, and you don't raise that. You don't raise that. And the fact of the matter is that I love Milwaukee. This is my hometown, and this is where I've served for over 20 years. So I think it also is the commitment, and I have given a major commitment, as has my family, and that's just the facts.
Mr. Blumey, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've said what I'm going to say on this. The reality is that Mr. Whitney likes to talk about this issue because he doesn't want to talk about the type of judge he would be and his reputation in the judicial system. This is a distraction, and if that's what he wants to talk about, then he's losing.
Last word, Mr. Whitney?
Yeah, so reputation in the judicial system, I have a reputation in the Milwaukee County Courthouse because I've actually appeared there, unlike Mr. Blumey, who has literally never appeared on any case in the Milwaukee County Circuit Court. When it comes to Mr. Dudinsky, the law is the law. It's not what you want it to be. And if the law says that you reside where your family lives, you need to apply the law to those facts. That's what I'm doing, and that's what Mr. Dudinsky is choosing not to do in the way that he is frankly gaming the system. Would he be saying this had he been appointed by Governor Walker for the position that he applied for out in Waukesha County? I think not.
We have some very interesting statements being made here. I'm going to just keep this going a little bit as long as we can remain civil.
Sure.
Anybody want to respond?
Yeah, I'd like to respond because if you look at 6.10, what you'll see a number of subsections. The subsection that Mr. Whitney has selected is, quite frankly, a shoehorn. What it says is, it sets out the dynamic, or at least applies to a dynamic. Let's say you have someone who lives in West Dallas and owns a business. Let's say they own a restaurant or something of that nature in West Milwaukee, say. And the two are next door to one another. And let's say the local alderman in West Milwaukee is helpful in getting that business owner their liquor license. Well, technically, this person would have two addresses to use, and one address would be his home address, the other one would be his business address. The law prevents that person from using the business address and must use the family home. And so what Mr. Whitney's doing is he's shoehorning a statute, quite frankly, misapplying a statute that's meant for a different type of scenario. I don't think Mr. Blumey or myself are claiming our business address as a residence. And so, but he's centering in on the family word. And quite frankly, it ought to cause everyone concerned that someone who's trying to become a judge is quite frankly misreading and misapplying the law.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Blumey, do you want to?
Well, this might be one of the only issues I agree with Paul Dudinsky on, but he is misapplying the law. That's not what the statute says. And it's exactly what Judge Dudinsky just said. It's if Bob and Sue own a home in Residence X and Sue owns a business in a different part of the city or a different city, Sue cannot vote from that city. I have two business addresses in the city of Milwaukee. One is just around the corner here at the Cream City Foundation. The other is at City Hall, where I serve as the Board of Zoning Appeals Chair. I'm not using either of those addresses. I'm using my home, where I live, where I pay taxes, and where I vote.
You know, if we only had some lawyers here, we could get to the bottom of this dispute.
I would just encourage everybody to read the statute and come to your own opinion as to whose interpretation of that particular statute is correct. It begins with married people. It doesn't begin with saying if you have a residence in one location and a job in another location. It specifically says married people. It was designed for the situation where you have someone living for an extended period of time away from home, such as in a logging camp or somewhere else. Their residence is where their family lives. That's what the statute is for, and that's the reason why these two individuals are not applying or abiding by the black letter law of the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you. This question may be ill-timed or perfectly timed. Demeanor and temperament. In the audience, a couple members of the audience asked this question as well. How would you describe your own temperament and demeanor that you'll bring to the court? And I think Judge Dudinsky is starting this time.
So if we take it back to law school, most of you are lawyers in the room, you probably, when you graduate, if you were like me, you probably thought, well, gosh, a judge scholarship is the most important thing, most important aspect of being a judge. And certainly scholarship is important. But as you practice, I don't know if you've had the experience I've had, and I've had this many times. I'm walking into a courtroom and another lawyer's walking out, and they turn to you and say, hey, watch out. So-and-so's in a bad mood today. They're talking about Judge so-and-so. And that's happened to me so often that I thought to myself, that's not the judge I want to be. I want to have my courtroom to be a welcoming place. I want to be balanced. I want to be even-tempered. Scholarship is very, very key. I'm into my statute book constantly. Some of the feedback I get from the lawyers who practice in front of me is that they haven't seen a judge go into the statute book as much as I do, and I believe in that fervently. But also having a welcoming place. People come into a courtroom, they're scared. Public speaking is something that's stressful. You've represented clients, you know. It's the number one fear that people have. And they're walking into a courtroom, guess what? They have a fear of being judged. I don't know by whom, but maybe the judge. So they have a fear that they're going to come into that courtroom and not have that welcoming place. So I think judicial temperament is so key into what we do and how we treat people. It also has to deal with procedural justice. When people are leaving the system, even when they've lost their case, but they feel like they've been treated fairly, they will say that they had a satisfactory experience. That's what all the data tells us when it comes to procedural justice. They want to make sure that they were heard and that they had a voice.
Mr. Whitney?
Yes. So I'm smart and accessible. That's where my demeanor and temperament is. And anybody who's ever worked with me knows that my door is literally always open. And I welcome people to come into my office at any time with questions. It happens all the time, both in my current employment, all of my former employment. I get calls from people outside of my office all the time looking for advice. And I, of course, always advise them that I'm not their lawyer before I give them legal advice. But I am always very, very accessible. And I plan on bringing that to the bench. When it comes to civil litigation and civil law in particular, I believe that accessibility is one of the big factors or big improvements that our judges can make. For example, we are papering ourselves to death in civil litigation. Oftentimes there'll be discovery disputes that attorneys are having, and as opposed to just simply calling up the judge in order to hash out the dispute and come with some sort of decision or ruling, instead what oftentimes happens is the judge hears about the discovery dispute, then demands briefs. They both sides introduce 15-page briefs, and 6 months later you finally have a ruling on what could have been handled in a matter of 5 minutes had the judge just been accessible, taken a phone call, and worked through the problem with the attorneys on the line very quickly and very smartly. All that costs a great deal to the litigants. It's not fair to the litigants. When it comes to my demeanor, one of the other aspects that I plan on bringing, particularly to the civil bench, is an actual enforcement of the proportionality rule, which is now in 80401, which stands for the proposition that we do not have to allow ridiculous amounts of discovery in cases that are small cases, which is going to be disproportionate to the amount that's in dispute. And judges can enforce requirements that discovery be limited, limit document productions, interrogatories, and even the overall length of time that they allow for depositions to take place. Thank you.
Mr. Bellamy?
Well, thank you very much. My whole career, I've been a bridge builder, a convener, and somebody who brings people to the table to collaborate and figure out ways that we can resolve conflict. I do that as the role of President and CEO of Cream City Foundation. Just this last Friday, we had over 150 health experts, government leaders, community activists over at the Potawatomi Hotel. And we had a full-day conference around how do we make the LGBTQ plus community more vibrant, more healthy, And so we had all these breakouts. So I've spent my entire career doing that. And Judge Dudinsky's absolutely correct. As a public defender, oftentimes my client's satisfaction was not necessarily based on the outcome of the case, but it was whether or not they felt that the judge listened to them and cared. And we all know that there are judges who do not care, quite frankly, and that's unacceptable. As Board of Zoning Appeals chairperson, most of the people that come before the board are pro se. They do not have representation. And so my number one goal there is to make sure that they know that, one, we read their materials, that we are prepared as board members. We know what they're asking for, and we've read what they've put together and the hard work that they put together. And two, that they know that they will, whether or not the board agrees with them, that they're going to walk out of there feeling like at least I had my opportunity to give my case. And that's very important when you deal at the Board of Zoning Appeals, because again, these folks are pro se. They don't understand a lot of times they don't understand the process. And so I have to make sure that the entire board is open, accessible, and making sure that they feel like their voice is being heard.
Thank you. I think we have time for one or maybe two questions here. This is from the audience. I'm going to adapt it a little bit. Reflecting back on your legal careers, is there any case or situation that you would have handled differently? I think we're going to start here with Mr. Whitney.
Sure. When I first came to the DA's office, this would have been roughly 16 years ago, 17 years ago, I was a very aggressive prosecutor, to be candid with you. I understood substantive law, criminal law, I understood procedural law very well, and if you know those two things, well, you can do a lot of good. You can also sometimes over-leverage somebody who's a criminal defendant, particularly if they are working with an attorney or no attorney at all, though that's rare, who is not maybe as astute as you are. And there are times when I was certainly, I believe, too aggressive as a prosecutor. Now I've realized that there's an awful lot of good that can be done by using those same attributes. The procedural law, substantive law, those can be used in order to do a great deal of good in our community. And that's exactly what I would like to do if I am hired by you folks to be our next Branch 5 Circuit Court judge. Thank you.
Mr. Blumey?
Yeah, so there's a couple cases in my career that still haunt me. And I think you can speak to any public defender and they'll probably tell you the same thing. We have huge caseloads, and there are a few cases that I remember of young folks who got caught in a really horrible situation. I wish that I could have been able to do more. I wish that the circumstances were different. And those are tough cases. And I think that the fact that we have a system where public defenders and prosecutors are overworked, they have too many cases. I regret not spending a little bit more time on some of those cases that still haunt me today. I know one of my clients is still in jail. When he went to prison, he was 17 years old, and I worked a lot on trying to find a family member, an aunt, a grandma, somebody who I could talk to in preparation for the sentencing hearing. And so that still haunts me. I wish I would have done more. Maybe there's a variety of things I could have done, but those types of cases are tough for me, and you never forget those types of cases.
Judge Dudinsky.
Yeah, I remember when I was in charge of the domestic violence unit, I used to do a ton of charging, and I've met with lots and lots of victims from different backgrounds. And I still remember this woman she was Latino, and she'd come in, and it was difficult to look in her eyes because she had been beaten, and have you ever seen where blood kind of runs into the whites of the eyes? And I remember looking at her, and your own eyes would kind of water up. But I went over, I cared for her, and then I sat down, and I kind of summed up the situation from just my review of the police reports and our brief encounter, and I sat down and I began to talk with her and describe what was going on and what had just happened. She had no familiarity with any justice system whatsoever, and she looked to me first generation, and English was probably her second language. And I went through everything, talked to her about the whole case, and I felt like I really was doing a great job breaking down these legal concepts in ways that she could understand, and it was coming to that moment, and I used to train the other prosecutors, make sure you always ask that person what they want, And so I did. I turned to her now because I really needed to know whether she was going to be cooperative with the prosecution or not. So I really needed to ask her what she wanted, and we had talked about this legal stuff. And so when I asked her the question, I said, what is it that you would like? And she said, Mr. Dudinsky, do you have any baby formula and diapers for me? And I remember thinking to myself at that moment, because I had been kind of prideful, thinking, oh gosh, I'm doing a great job when I'm talking to her. But I hadn't gone to her. Of course, she cares about her kids. Number one, that was the most important thing to her. And I didn't have diapers and baby formula in my desk drawers. And on that day, it was probably back in 2001, 2002, I remember saying to myself, we have got to commit with folks from the community. That's going to be much more effective. And lo and behold, we've got a great Sojourner Family Peace Center here in Milwaukee.
Judge, I'm going to have to go to closing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off there.
No problem.
We just have time for closing remarks. 1 minute instead of 2. And the order was chosen before the forum. Mr. Whitney is first, followed by Mr. Blummy and Judge Dudinsky. So, Mr. Whitney.
Thank you. So I care deeply about this community, and I really care deeply about the integrity of our courts. I am raising my family here, and I want to make sure that our courts are working well. And as I look out here, I see there's Judge Kahn and Judge Kumich. There's also Judge Kremers. We do have judges that have last names that don't begin with a K as well. There's Judge Stankovitz, Judge Maroney, Judge Gooley. Who are these? These are all judges that have recently retired, and I could go on. There has been a major brain drain from the Milwaukee County courts over the course of the last 7 or 8 years. You're talking about hundreds of years of experience, frankly, when it was all added up, probably easily 150 years between the 7 that I just named there or so. We need somebody who can be who can be elected to this position, who can hit the ground running from day one, who knows exactly what's going on in all the courts, be it criminal or civil, who's seen it all, who is smart, who can make decisions, and who's decisive. And I'm exactly that individual. I have done it. I've been doing it for 16 years, and I would love to do it for Milwaukee County. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks again for having me. Would love to earn your all's support in the primary election. If we want to change our broken criminal justice system, we need to start electing different people. Nothing will change if we keep electing the same type of person as judge. I have 2 opponents in this race. One is a 2-time Scott Walker appointee in a county that Scott Walker lost 67 to 31%. The other is a tough-on-crime former prosecutor who built his career on being the most hardline of all of them. And he even said that today. He over-leveraged his power as a prosecutor, and that is dangerous. I am the one true progressive in this race. I've spent my career fighting for equity and justice, and nothing will change if we keep electing the same type of person as judge. Thank you.
Judge Dudinsky.
I do want to thank you all for being here. I do want to, even though Mr. Blummy agreed with me twice now, I do want to say one thing. He mentioned that there are judges who don't care. That's not the folks I work with. I work with terrific people. I've got a great, I don't want to name them all because I might leave someone out, but we've got some amazing court commissioners. We've got some terrific folks working downtown in Milwaukee, and they're toiling and they're hard, and they do care a great deal. I'm one of them. I care a great deal. I will continue to serve. I also want to thank you for your service. One of the benefits of being a judge is seeing folks come into my courtroom and work with folks who have been marginalized, who might be very difficult clients. I have more respect now for attorneys than ever before. And so I would like to continue to serve in that capacity and want to thank you. And also thank you, Judge D'Amato, and thank you, Dave. I'm sure I join all 3 of us in thanking you.
Well, I want to thank Dave Hafer for moderating the forum today. I want to thank our candidates for being here. I think it's really important that they face the electorate, that they answer your questions. And you've submitted some really good questions for them, bearing upon how they would be as a judge in the Circuit Court of Milwaukee County. I also want to thank Katie Borowski and the Milwaukee Bar Association for all that they do to put on these forums. This is not easy. This is a monumental task, and they do a great job, and I know they'll continue to do so. So we thank Katie and the Milwaukee Bar Association staff. I want to remind everybody here, the spring primary is going to be on February 18th. The spring election is Tuesday, April 7th. Early voting actually has started today. I think it's really important that, obviously, you care, you're here, you will be voting, because you recognize how important it is to vote. But you need to tell your friends and your relatives. You need to educate them so that they can go to the polls and that they can cast their ballot. And they're doing it with knowledge with respect to their candidates. Voting, clearly, we always say voting is a right. But really, when you think about it, it's a duty that you owe your community if you care about your courts and if you care about government. The last thing I want to mention to you is that for the lawyers and the judges in the room, tomorrow is the Milwaukee Bar Association Judges Night at the Grand Exchange. Starts at 5:30 p.m. It's a great event. If you haven't signed up, it's not too late. You can talk to any one of the staff members, but it's a wonderful event to attend. And so I hope to see all of you there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice work. Nice work.
Thanks, Paul.
Good job. Let me get out of your guys' way.
All right, man. Smart. We had 2 drinks.
Wow.
I ran out a long time ago.
You could have borrowed mine from me. I'll give it to you.
I was thinking about hitting a Diet Coke.
It's not vodka. No, actually, yeah. I was surprised. I was like, hey, I got me a Diet Coke.